An unexpected snowstorm trapped mountaineers in a cramped snow cave, and the air was running out. Only 2 days later, one of them managed to dig himself out of the snowdrift, but instead of a rescue squad, he only found a few of his friends' dead bodies. What happened to Levin's group in that cave remains one of the most spine-chilling mountaineering mysteries. The details of this tragedy can make blood run cold in your veins. But what really happened to Levin's group on Mount Elbrus? Viewer discretion is advised. On May 2, 1990, 6 mountaineers left the shelter of Levin to go higher into the mountains. This shelter is a camp located at an altitude of 4,130 meters on the route leading to the summit of Elbrus. Yet on that day, the group hadn't planned to conquer the peak. They only went out to acclimate so that their bodies get used to the decreased pressure and rarefied air at such heights. The group was led by 2 experienced rock climbers, Sergei Levin and Sergei Farbstein. Not only were they good at tackling extra challenging routes, but they also took part in rescue operations in the mountains. In addition, Farbstein was a doctor by profession and had already conquered Elbrus twice. So, leaving the shelter of Levin, both men felt absolutely confident, as did the rest of the mountaineers they led. And even that's not all. At that moment, a few Russian teams were summiting the mountain at the same time, and Levin's group, being the most well-trained one, was going to become involved in a rescue operation if such a need arose. Regarding the mountain itself, Mount Elbrus is the highest peak of the Caucasian Range, dividing Europe and Asia. It's a sleeping volcano with 2 summits. The western, standing at 5,642 meters, and the eastern, 20 meters shorter. Compared to K2 or Everest, which I've told you about in previous videos, Elbrus doesn't appear that ominous. But this impression is deceptive. Mount Elbrus is covered with 54 glaciers with a surface area greater than San Francisco and carved with giant cracks. Although Elbrus is only the world's 237th tallest mountain, according to unofficial data, up to 20 people die on its slopes every year. On Everest, this figure averages less than 5 people per year. During the deadliest season, 17 mountaineers died on the mountain. All that being said, there's no exact statistic regarding the lives claimed by Elbrus, since nature isn't the mountain's only danger. The U.S. Department of State strongly discourages U.S. citizens from traveling to Mount Elbrus due to terrorism, abductions, and the risk of civil unrest. Yet, there might also be something creepy lurking in the mountains, which Levin's group had to face in 1990. However, before the disaster happened, everything was going according to plan. The mountaineers spent 3 days in the shelter of Levin to get used to the high altitude conditions. Then, in the afternoon on day 4, they decided to go a bit higher, to 4,500 meters. It took the experienced rock climbers no longer than 40 minutes, after which they stopped for a quick bite. It was then that the group noticed the weather started to deteriorate. The fog shrouded the mountains below, and a wind rose and carried the snow from the snowdrifts. Levin's group ended up trapped because bad weather and zero visibility prevented them from returning to the shelter. However, the experienced mountaineers knew what to do in this situation. They relayed a message to the shelter that they were going to dig a snow cave and spend the night there, which is a pretty common practice for climbers. Although Levin's group dug a 2-room cave and successfully spent the night in that temporary shelter, the weather showed no signs of improving. The wind gusts reached 108 kilometers per hour, which is assessed as 11 out of 12 possible points, meaning that it's the last step before a hurricane. In addition, the temperature on Elbrus dropped to -5 degrees Celsius, and the humidity increased. In the morning, the mountaineers, exhausted after a night in a snow cave, tried to descend to the shelter, but were forced to go back because of low visibility and Sergei Farbstein's poor health condition. It was the first ominous sign for the team. The Russians turned back to the snow cave when they met 2 Japanese mountaineers descending from the top. The bad weather was in full force further down the track, and the foreigners could have died if they'd tried to move forward. So Levin's group offered the Japanese to join them. The snow cave they dug in the evening before had 2 rooms and was even heated with a Primus stove. Soon, one of the rooms collapsed, and the exhausted mountaineers had no energy to fix it. Now, 8 people had to be packed into an area of just a few square meters. However, during the day, Levin reported to the shelter several times, saying that all was well with the group. So the idea of sending a rescue squad to fetch them never even crossed anyone's mind. This situation continued until the evening, just before the group's second night in the mountains, when the leader of the Russians finally admitted that they needed help. Yet looking for Levin and his group at night was too risky, with the storm still roaring outside. Moreover, the bad weather disrupted the work of phones and walkie-talkies. So, Levin established the morning as the time for another phone call, and the night fell. This night would become part of the world's mountaineering history. At around 7 a.m. on May 4th, a few climbers set out from the shelter of 11 to look for Levin's group. However, since none of them knew the snow cave's exact coordinates, they didn't manage to find it and returned. Meanwhile, horrific events were unfolding on the slope. A member of the Soviet group, Valery Orinstov, regained consciousness in the cave. Everything around, including himself, was covered with snow. It took the exhausted man a whole hour to dig himself out and crawl to the surface. Yet what he saw there made his blood run cold in his veins. Not far from the cave's entrance, 3 of his groupmates were lying frozen to death. The group's leader, Sergei Levin, was one of them. Quite possibly, Orinstov was shocked by the thought. Where was everyone else? The man rushed back to the cave, now buried in snow, and found 3 other mountaineers. 2 of his friends, Sergei Farbstein and Oleg Buldakov, were unconscious but alive. A half-conscious Japanese man was sitting nearby. The other foreigner was nowhere to be found. Orinstov was the only one capable of calling for help. So, despite his total exhaustion and shock, he started descending from the mountain and soon saw the rescuers. The man told them the cave's whereabouts, but it was already too late for those staying in it. The missing Japanese climber was found dead in a deep ice crack. Oleg Buldakov's heart stopped when the rescuers were already carrying him off the mountain. Regarding Sergei Farbstein, although he was taken to the shelter of 11, he died unconscious, never coming around. So Valery Orinstov was the only person who knew at least something about his 5 friends' last moments. Thus, it was impossible to verify his testimony. It would be nice to have another witness in this story, since very strange things were happening to the mountaineers right before death. As it turned out, one of the men who died near the cave entrance was missing a shoe, another one a jacket, and the third one's pants were halfway down. In addition, some of their gear had disappeared as well. Does this mean someone robbed the dead mountaineers or stole their things while they were still alive? However, it looks like something much worse happened that fateful night on Mount Elbrus. I didn't manage to find a single piece of information regarding whether the surviving Japanese man ever told his version of the story. So, Valery Orinstov remained the only information source. But could he be trusted? No one understood how such a horrible tragedy could have happened to the most experienced team. Moreover, a group of newbie mountaineers was staying not far from Levin's group. They survived the bad weather without severe injuries and successfully descended from the mountain. This appeared strange, so various rumors started spreading through the mountaineering community. Some instructors believed Levin's group had been using experimental drugs for better acclimatization. Yet, unknown side effects made the climbers' bodies less resistant to cold. A forensic examination confirmed that all of the Russians had died of hypothermia. That is, they had frozen to death. This theory is supported by the ice formations that were found on the faces of the 3 men who had died near the cave entrance. This meant they had laid in the snow for a long time while still alive. So, the climbers were either unconscious, or their minds were clouded by the influence of some unknown factors. However, I've stumbled upon another theory on Levin's group, claiming they were on a secret rescue mission. 52 ice drilling hooks were found with the dead Russians. Yet, first of all, a group of 6 people didn't need as many. Second of all, this gear wasn't necessary at all during a short acclimatization ascent. However, other Russian climbers explained that in Soviet times, ice drilling hooks used to be given to foreigners in exchange for other mountaineering gear. For 12 to 15 such hooks, one could receive a pair of imported boots that were impossible to otherwise obtain in the USSR. And at this affordable price, the foreign climbers could lay their hands on titanium ice drilling hooks that cost a pretty penny at home. However, in my opinion, it's not an irrefutable explanation. How many foreigners had the group planned to meet during a short acclimatization stroll so that they took over 50 hooks? And that's not even the greatest mystery of Levin's group tragedy. In the snow cave that became the last shelter for the 5 victims, a puddle of blood was found. And in the stomach of one mountaineer, there was some hair belonging to his teammate. And you know what else? There's no additional information about these creepy finds. Where did the blood come from? Whose was it? How much of it was there? I've only come across a brief mention of a wound on the face of Oleg Buldakov, one of the 2 Russians found in the cave. And again, nothing else. It's the same with the hair in the stomach. Was it just one hair, or was it a whole tuft? If it's the latter, how on earth did it get there? The mere existence of these 2 eerie, unexplained facts makes me think. Nothing is quite that clear-cut about Levin's group's demise. Apart from that, other mountaineers were saying that the only surviving Russian, Unsolved, held a secret conversation with the rescue squad leader in the shelter of Levin. No one heard what they talked about, but reportedly, after that conversation, Unsolved's testimony changed. However, let's discuss some facts that could have actually caused the deaths of experienced mountaineers. First, the group got into a dangerous situation because of a sudden storm and ended up trapped at a considerable altitude without the necessary gear. However, the real problem the climbers first experienced was their insufficient acclimatization. On the 3rd day of their trip, they reached a height of 4,500 meters. If I'm not mistaken, the designated term for that milestone is supposed to be 2 times longer. It's vital because above an altitude of 3,000 meters, the so-called altitude sickness can develop. Its first symptoms are headache, dizziness, nausea, and overall fatigue, which can be followed by lung or brain swelling. This damage is so serious that the person's consciousness gets blurry. They lose the ability to walk and eventually freeze to death. Altitude sickness can explain Sergei Farbstein's sudden weakness. All of this is caused by hypoxia, that is, the lack of oxygen in the body. Since the higher you go, the less oxygen your body can extract from the air. When the mountaineers ended up in the snow cave, the problem of a lack of oxygen became even more pressing. The air in the cramped chamber was contaminated by carbon dioxide from 8 people's breathing, gasoline vapors, and dangerous chemicals produced by the burning of the Primus stove. All this went on virtually without any ventilation. Moreover, the storm prevented the mountaineers from going out to walk and get at least a little bit of fresh air. The lack of motor activity, combined with the lack of oxygen, caused the people to gradually start freezing. The situation was aggravated by high humidity. Condensate accumulated in the small cave, and, together with the snow and the fog, it made the Soviet climbers' down jackets soaking wet. All this only intensified the mountaineers' gravest danger, the cold. Hypothermia gradually reaches the entire body. The open body areas, such as the face and the limbs, are the first to suffer. Then, the cold creeps inside, hurting the internal organs, including the brain and the heart. At an altitude of over 4,000 meters, the human body is unable to recover. So, the 8 mountaineers grew increasingly exhausted, and their consciousness started dimming. One of the Japanese tourists probably tried to descend to the shelter by himself at night, but died in the ice crack. When it became impossible to breathe inside the cave, the 3 Russians climbed out and lay down in the snow to protect themselves from the wind. Wet and exhausted, they froze to death. After these 4 people left the cave, some fresh air was allowed in, which probably helped Unsolved survive. Yet, why did the other 2 Russians in the cave die, while the surviving Japanese man seemed to be perfectly okay? Could a lapse in their sound mind have made the 3 people who died outside the cave start taking their clothes off? And most importantly, I don't know how to blame the cold for the puddle of blood in the cave and human hair in the Soviet mountaineer's stomach. So, although the cold is known to be the killer of Levin's group, the causes of this tragedy remain a great unsolved mystery to this day. At any rate, it looks like some important information about the Elbrus tragedy has been concealed. What's your opinion?